This afternoon, I have to admit to an error of sorts. Kind of reminds me of that guy who said, yeah, I'm not always right. I was wrong once. At that time, I thought I was mistaken, but I wasn't. So I'm kind of the guy who, when I'm mistaken, I could admit it, more or less. Actually, it's not a big mistake. It's just a refinement, and something that came up about, I guess, about a month or so ago now on the show. A caller called in, and one of my fine staff members, Derek, over at Stand to Reason, did a little extra research for me and gave me some information that kind of allows me to refine my response a little bit more. The question was about St. Maximilian of Tebessa. Of course, you remember St. Maxi, right? Everybody knows St. Max. Actually, St. Maximilian was cited on this show as evidence that the early Christians were pacifists as a matter of principle, and it was kind of offered in defense of pacifism. See, the early Christians were pacifists. They were followers of Jesus. Therefore, if we're followers of Jesus, we should be pacifists too. I actually don't think that's sound. You don't get your doctrine from the early Christians. You get your doctrine from the Scriptures themselves, although it's good to take into consideration what the early Christians had to say, and sometimes they'll give us an insight or an angle on it that we now, 2,000 years removed from the facts, may not have. We might have lost that. And so, as someone once said famously, we stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. In the same sense, I, for one, do not want to disregard the counsel of the ancients with regards to things spiritual. But the final assessment has to be from the Scriptures. And frankly, even though, well, let me back up and say how I stated it in the past. Even though, as far as I could tell, virtually all of the early Christians for the first couple hundred years were pacifists, it still doesn't require pacifism from us because there's nothing in the Scriptures, certainly the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures are filled with bloodshed that was commended by God himself in many cases. The God of the Old Testament's not a pacifist. But some would think, well, Jesus changed all that in the Sermon on the Mount and turned the other cheek and that kind of stuff. And I have argued against that view for a number of reasons. One is I think that's a misunderstanding of what Jesus meant in Matthew chapter 5. And in fact, when Jesus had his own cheek struck, he did not simply turn the other cheek. This at his trial. And if you read the account, when he was struck unfairly, he asked for an accounting. For what crime do you strike me, basically? If I have spoken wrongly, he said, then bear witness of the wrong. If not, then why did you strike me? So he asked for an accounting of that. And there are other passages in the New Testament I could raise that point out that pacifism wasn't really taught, plus I have, or taught by Jesus. Plus I have another argument that's just on moral grounds itself, that pacifism, strictly put, is immoral. But even so, in the light of that, people will still cite those from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century that were pacifists. They knew they could not serve in the military, and therefore this is evidence against my view. Now again, as I pointed out, first come the Scripture, then comes the early Christian witness in that authoritative order. But as it turns out, in a way I was mistaken, because at least according to the account of St. Maximilian of Tebessa, who said, I cannot serve in the military, I cannot do wrong, I am a Christian, which suggests to the casual reader at least that serving in the military is wrong because the military participates in warfare, and Christians or pacifists can't do that. At least in the case of St. Maximilian, this was not the reason that he couldn't serve in the military. And it's got me thinking about the rest of the pacifists. It may still be that there were Christians who are pacifist as a matter of principle and wouldn't serve in the military because of that. But it turns out that St. Maximilian of Tebessa, the one who was actually cited against my view a couple of, say, a month or so ago on the show, it appears was not a pacifist. This was not his objection. And my suspicion is that St. Maximilian's objection was probably more kin to the objection of the rest of the Christians regarding serving in the military than not. In other words, if they're like him, then it wasn't for pacifism's sake, and therefore we can't cite them as pacifists in favor of our own pacifism.